so now I'm glad I'm actually inside in a screened-in area, and I'm not getting bit by mosquitoes anymore. And now we got a special guest. His name is Josiah Hunt. This is his farm. Those are his char piles and the char pit that you guys saw. And I definitely would consider this guy an expert on the biochar. He's been making it for a number of years and doing a lot of research and improving the results with the biochar. So first I want to ask him, Josiah, so how did you get in to making the biochar?
No one else could provide it for me, so I just started making it myself. In 2008, there was an article in a National Geographic magazine talking about soil health and the declining status of soil health in the entire globe. And that's where I first learned the term biochar and the idea of utilizing waste organic materials to produce this charcoal product, which could be used to improve soils for generations and generations to come, and by doing so could also help sequester carbon globally. And the whole idea was like, wow, for real? Does this work? Being scientifically minded, I had to test that first part first. Does it work? And so I started just making it myself in my backyard. I was doing a home construction and had lots of scrap lumber around, and just started making fire in many different ways until I got better at it and produced lots of different black stuff and started experimenting with it and researching, experimenting, started getting some good results after I made some mistakes, and it all led from there. Eventually it became my career and has been for the past 5 years.
Now for those of you guys that don't know, we're going to ask him, Josiah, what is biochar?
That is a great question. Biochar is charred biomass. That's in its most simplistic definition. Now I'm going to start embellishing on that definition. It is charred biomass intended for use in soil. I'm going to add some more, because that is when you're talking about it in its I produced it now, we'll apply it to soil. Well, what we found looking in this whole biochar paradigm is that biochar already exists in soils.
Really? Even in some people's yards right now, there's some
you've
biochar
probably already got biochar in your yard, a little bit at least. So biochar is essentially charred biomass. And from the time that biomass started inhabiting our planet and lightning struck down, or for whatever reason fire was created, that created char. So char has been part of our soils as long as soils have been supporting plant life. And some soils have remarkably high amounts of biochar already. For instance, the North American plains, the Iowa, Illinois kind of area. There is as much as 50% of the organic matter in the topsoil in the form of pyrogenic carbon. A lot of people just say biochar, kind of because we're coming from the biochar world when we're investigating this. And so now that term has been applied to charcoal in soil. So what is biochar? We're still working on the exact definition that won't take 3 pages. It's been around forever. It's part of soils throughout the world to varying degrees. It's something that we're now creating and using. And I think most people in the biochar industry would also attach sustainable somewhere in there. That was part of the idea when the seed was planted that became this whole biochar thing. The idea was, wow, it seems as though charcoal in soil is linked to healthy soils. We see a direct correlation there. And the world right now is experiencing a carbon imbalance. Much too much carbon in the atmosphere and a loss of carbon from the soils. We also have a great demand for energy and a huge amount of wasted biomass. So we can take the wasted biomass, cleanly burn that to produce energy and biochar, take the biochar and put it in the soil, improving farmland and sequestering carbon at the same time.
Wow.
And all in a way that is not out of sync with the planet, but in sync with the planet's natural systems, because charcoal is already part of the soil. And I think our best route to success with biochar is paying attention to the ways in which it occurs naturally in nature. Now, we can also embellish upon that because, well, we're basically taking natural systems and redesigning them. So, but I think it is very important to start with that seed of biochar is not something that we just totally created out of nothing. It exists and has existed for a very long time.
Wow. I mean, I encourage you guys to garden by the practices of modeling nature. I try to duplicate nature, not maybe as nature exists now after we've been here for hundreds or thousands of years and the topsoils are being eroded and getting the nutrients leached out of them, but how nature would have existed, and I'm trying to duplicate that in my garden. I think biochar could definitely play a good role in doing that.
Well, here, I'm going to interject for just 1 second right here. I thought of something else while we were talking about that, is the initial term of biochar came about in this whole nexus that revolved around terra preta, right? The terra preta soils of the Amazon, which are the most amazing example that we know of right now of biochar's use. And it's an exemplary model of how to use biochar properly. But what's important to recognize is that that's not the only example of humans' use of charcoal to improve soils. What we've now been finding, I say we as a biochar community, is widespread use of charcoal in soils throughout time and space. Many cultures throughout the world have been using charcoal a long time. It just seems that we, as a Western culture, have somewhat forgotten about this element of farming.
Wow. So you just mentioned charcoal. We've used charcoal as farming. So can somebody just go out and buy Kingsford charcoal and grind it up and put it in their soil and expect the same results that they'd get with some, you know, a good, well-produced biochar?
He's good. Now I know why you watch him.
Yeah. Because I'm cheap, man. The charcoal stuff is cheap.
Yeah.
And biochar, man, might cost me more money.
Yeah, but no. Yes, but. I'd put a yes, but. Then the but would probably be in caps lock. Because charcoal is produced with the intent of making a fuel product. Thus the coal addition at the end of it. They're not just calling it char, they're calling charcoal. Coal like a fuel substitute. And you know, if your intention is to produce a fuel, oilier the better. The more oil content, the higher BTU value, the more energy you're going to get out of it. The easier it lights and quicker it burns, it's great. If you're trying to make a soil product, those oils are not necessarily going to be your best friend. They can create biochars that are hydrophobic, not hydrophilic, hydrophobic. They are scared of water. They do not play well with water. Those oils and tars are basically like soot kind of compounds. They're very carbon rich and can completely throw your carbon-nitrogen balance kind of out of whack for a temporary amount of time. Now they can be used to improve soils, but they also come with them a big, yeah, but kind of thing. And so that's just with the charcoals intended for use in soil. The briquettes, such as Kingsford often, to a high degree can be devolatilized coal. So basically harvesting coal from the ground, devolatilizing it, and then adding some other stuff and making a briquette for cooking. Yeah, that's very low likelihood of helping your plants grow.
So don't do it. So there's two ways to get biochar. Either you can make it yourself, which I kind of showed you Josiah's example on how he's done it here himself, or you could buy it. And we'll talk more about those two ways in a little bit, but before we get into how to make it, why don't we talk about the benefits? You know, he's done definitely a lot of research on this, so Josiah, what would you say the main benefits are for a home gardener or for farmers out there that are watching, and why it probably should be used in the farmer garden to improve the crops, the yields, and all that kind of stuff?
If you use biochar, your life will be more simple. No, I'm just kidding, I'm totally kidding. Some people might try to portray that, and you know, it's just another tool. It's a fantastic tool though. It's a fantastic tool, and I think that's the most important thing to remember. There's a lot of, initially especially, there was a lot of excitement about like, wow, biochar, you know, and then sometimes it doesn't quite meet what some people have created as hype, and then, oh, well, biochar, and then it becomes negative. Well, it's just a tool, but it's a fantastic tool. When sorry, I just ate a mosquito. When done properly, and this is very often the case, you get increased water use efficiency.
So it retains the water, right?
Yeah, and helps against drought resistance and all different kinds of things. But increased water use efficiency is one easy way to say it. Increased nutrient efficiency, meaning with the same amount of nutrients, your plants will have access to more of them, or basically better. The nutrients will be used more efficiently. So water use efficiency, nutrient use efficiency, and oftentimes greater microbial activity. A greater proliferation of the beneficial microorganisms. But that's a tricky one, because it's not like the biochar goes in there and starts saying, hey, I'm biochar and everyone's got to be nice now. But oftentimes the physical properties of the biochar can create a soil environment that's more conducive to the beneficial microorganisms to do their job, such as greater tilth. This is another way of saying like the fluffiness of soil, the ability to work in soil. So greater tilth, which also directly relates to penetration of water, the water's ability to penetrate through the soil. The ability of air to be in the soil as well, because soil really should be only about half soil, and the rest of it should be kind of water and air space. So biochar can really help with that. So basically, it's working on physical, chemical, and biological ways. It can physically change the structure of your soil, loosening things up, creating more airspace, which can also lead directly to the biological components. Those biological components are also going to be pretty darn happy about the chemical attributes of biochar, because biochar has extremely high surface area. I'm going to try and put that surface area into a mind's picture there. They'll often use a reference like a gram of biochar. A gram of biochar is going to be like the little tiny bit right there in my hand. A gram of biochar can have as much surface area as a tennis court.
Wow. To
potentially as much as a football field.
Wow.
So that's if you were to unravel it and flatten it all out. Really, really, really high surface area. So if you look at it under a microscope, it's not just like these flat little things, or it's not like a grain of sand or something where you have the surface area is what's on the outside. Because the biochar is produced from organic material that has a vascular structure, it has tubes and tunnels all the way through it. So although you have the exterior surface area, you also have an interior surface area which is also active, because microbes can, little bacteria are living in there, fungi can travel in there, even root hairs can travel in there and pull the nutrients and water out of there that the microbes and it becomes a housing for the microorganisms, a housing that deals well with water and with nutrients. An interesting part of the biochar is that it's largely carbon. And the fact that it's carbon lends to partly to the ability to work so well with these elements. Is that, how do I explain this one lightly? It plays well with others.
All right, Josiah, so we just learned that the biochar has a lot of carbon. So like, Josiah, already add the compost to my garden. The compost has a lot of carbon. I'm just adding that, right? Why should I add the biochar that also has carbon?
Very good question. Yeah, soil organic carbon typically just stops at that as far as the definition. But soil organic carbon can have more than one type. One way to differentiate that would just be to call it pyrogenic carbon, or some people say biochar. As I kind of mentioned earlier, pretty much most soils throughout the world have some biochar, even to a small degree, left over from forest fires, grass fires, or fires of any kind. Carbon in soil is a very important aspect, and there is a difference between charred carbon and uncharred carbon. One very interesting thing here is that the charred carbon is not biologically degradable in the same way that a compost carbon would be. So if you were to say, oh, well, I've been using compost carbon, but that stuff biologically degrades, and then after a couple years or decades, it's gone from my soil. Biochar lasts for hundreds of thousands of years. Why don't I just use biochar and then I never have to worry about any other carbon ever again? Totally wrong again. I would not suggest that. There's a balance. I think it's even if you're putting the biochar in your soil and it's a great source of carbon, it's not going to react the same way in that soil environment as a raw carbon would. Basically, the biochar carbon is not biologically degradable. Fungi and bacteria cannot break it apart and eat it for energy.
Wow. So you talked about the two kinds of carbon. What ratios do you think for optimal growth and optimal health of our plants and optimal health of the planet should we have in the soil between the charred carbon versus the uncharred?
Well, this is uncharted territory.
See how much fun I have on my show?
But I'll speculate anyways. Because it is a new frontier in biochar science. We're at the front of this here, and I've been looking at some of the research articles coming out, and it does appear that there seems to be an optimal ratio if you're using nature as a
reference point.
As a reference point, yeah. And one example would be in the fertile prairies of America, the fertile Midwest there. There is a high level of biochar, naturally occurring biochar in the soils. And the ratios are typically between 30% and 50% of the organic matter in the topsoil. Okay, I was interested, so I did some very preliminary research into the terra preta soils that are so famous in the Amazon. And there's very little research that I found that was very helpful with this, but it seems to be somewhat similar, as though there's almost a 30% to 50% biochar to regular raw, or maybe you could call it raw rather than cooked, or cooked carbon. So I guess that would be like a 2/3 to 0.5% biochar derived carbon to organic carbon, raw carbon.
So if we want that level of the biochar or the cooked carbon, I like that, cooked and uncooked carbon, how much should we be adding when we add it to our soil, and can you add too much biochar to your soil?
I think too much biochar is a matter of time. And it's important to recognize too that soil is three-dimensional. So a lot of research done on biochar will often list things as tons per acre or tons per hectare. But it's also important to think of it in volumetric terms as well, as in how deep was that application done. And then over time, how long till you accumulate that amount. Typically, I have found it to be safest to stay within 5 to 10% of the volume where applied. If you're only applying it in the top inch, stay to 5 to 10% by volume in that top inch. In the top foot, 5 to 10% by volume in that top foot. These are safe. This is a very safe and very effective place to stay. Now, I've also done experiments on, pushing it real far, because the images of the terra preta soils in the Amazon, they're black. They are black as night in some cases. There's obviously much more than just 5 to 10% biochar. And I've done this with my own gardening and done it with my own potting as well, and I found that over time, through incremental applications, I'm able to continue to improve my soils with other additions of biochar, but slow and steady. So I might start with 5 to 10%, and then slowly additionally add it later as part of my compost, as part of my fertilizer, or sometimes with my new potting, with my new plantings, so that slowly the soil will accumulate to something more like possibly as much as 20 to 30% by volume. But I do not recommend starting with that right off the bat. I have seen people that have gone, and I've been one of the people that have definitely gone too far. And part of what can happen with the too far, especially on immediate terms, is it just disrupts a balance that you might have already had. That balance might be a pH balance, a nutrient balance, microbial population, and other things like that. Basically, disrupting your soil balance can have negative effects.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the pH, because I think that comes up a lot for people in biochar. If you add the biochar, it'll mess up your pH. So, you know, is this true? Does it happen? And what would you say about that?
Well, if your pH is 4.5, and you're as we commonly find out here in Hawaii, very low pH, the high pH of biochar is often very welcome. But biochar tends to have a high pH. When producing biochar, it's nearly impossible to not accidentally produce a little bit of ash with it. Part of biochar is the ash that comes with it. It's part of the fire process. When you make an omelet, you break a couple eggs or something, right? When you make biochar, you might make a little ash. I don't know. We can cut that out later if it's horrible. But the ash has an alkaline. The ash is what lends the biochar its alkalinity. So biochar will, depending on the producer, the production style, it will typically have a high pH, anywhere between 8.5 to 9.5. And when you incorporate that in your soil, it can change your soil pH. Typically, it's going to bring your soil pH up. Now, it's important to remember that's the ash content of the biochar which is causing that. The biochar is essentially pure carbon, and the temporary shift in pH is mostly due to the ash, which is, again, I guess I use that word temporary. But it's important to pay attention to that, because disrupting your pH in a negative way will give you negative plant growth response. So again, 5 to 10% biochar, typically not going to find this to be an issue. Although it does have a pH of, say 8.5 to 9.5, it'll often have a low the calcium carbonate equivalent, meaning low pH impact.
All right, good. So it can be safe to use in small amounts, and if you add too much, you're probably going to mess some things up. So Josiah, let's talk about how to get the biochar. I mean, you could buy it from a hopefully reputable source, or you could make it yourself. And just because you make it yourself, it doesn't mean it's going to be the best biochar. So Josiah, what would you say as to, like, if you're going to make it or buy it, what are some maybe key factors that somebody wants to look for to make sure they get a good quality biochar? Because, you know, I want people to be able to get a quality biochar that's actually going to give them results and not something they're going to put in their soil and mess everything up.
Well, I'd say if you're going to make it yourself, don't be scared to mess it up a little bit. And here's how you can help fix your goof ups. Typically, when I was first making biochar, I messed up quite a lot, but I was still able to get good results. So say I made a biochar that had a very high pH because it was half ash and half biochar. That can be fixed. You know, there's a lot of organic amendments that you're going to use for your soil which might have a low pH. And typically, by incorporating biochar with your compost, most of the problems that you might find through, you know, a rookie producing biochar, such as I was for many, many years, most of those can be solved just by incorporating it with your compost. The magic of compost will help ease a lot of those things. Making it yourself, a couple key pointers are typically hotter is better if you're talking about your backyard. Now, with large-scale industrial systems that can get very, very hot, that's not necessarily going to be the case. For backyard production, you do want it typically to be nice and hot. Always want clean feedstock. Clean feedstock, super important. Dry feedstock, and be safe.
All right, very good. So you talked about if you're making it yourself, but what about buying a good biochar? There's many companies out there, unfortunately. You know, I wish it was available in every nursery. And if you go to nurseries and you ask for biochar, they might look at you like you're from the moon or something, because most people don't know what biochar and rock dust, these cutting-edge technologies that are really supposed to be in the earth, but after years of soil depletion may not be. And that's why I recommend you guys use them for the best results. So what can somebody look for?
Look for Soil Reef.
So the Soil Reef, that's a brand, right?
Yeah, that's a brand that I work with. And we're trying to make it accessible to anyone that's out there. And we're also trying to make products that are very effective and easy to use. So we have a plain biochar product, and we also have some more user-friendly biochar products. A biochar that's 50% biochar with compost, worm castings, and kelp meal. And then another biochar that's gone through the process that he showed you earlier that I'm doing in my backyard. I've taken that basic process that I developed over years of development out here in Hawaii, and I've stepped it up a couple notches, and we're taking that to the mainland and work it for national distribution. But we're not the only player in the field. You should be able to find biochar if you look hard enough. You should be able to find some. And right now, we're still working as an industry on exactly how to set the bar so that someone like you could easily just pull up and say, oh, this is a good biochar because it has this, that, and the other. But, I wish I could just say one word or two, one thing. Right now, my best suggestion would be with you, if you're not going with our company, because I know our company and I know what we're doing is good, then research the company that you're buying it for. Research them good, look online, do the best you can. It's right now that's the best I can give you is do your own research. We're working on it as an industry. Part of the reason is because, like I mentioned earlier, it's black, it's black, it's black, and then it's black again. You cook it low, you cook it high, it's da-da-da. So you can't just look at a biochar and say, oh, it's good, or it's not good. Research the companies that you're buying from.
I mean, another thing I'd recommend for you guys, just being the layman about biochar that I am, just buy a little bit at first and do some testing in some test plots to see if you get good results or not. If you get good results, it's probably something that's going to work for you. And if you're not getting the results, maybe try to find another brand. Hopefully in an upcoming episode, I'll actually feature the Soil Reef products and have a special discount available for you guys out there so you guys can get it shipped directly to you, because I know this stuff can be very hard to find. All right, Josiah, so we just learned about the biochar and some maybe a good company to buy it from, but what I specifically want to talk about now is the mature biochar that I saw and shared with you guys. It had the fungal hyphae and the fungi in there and the tree roots growing in there. I think I saw an earthworm earlier actually and a whole bunch of insects crawling around in there. And why is that matured biochar better than 100% biochar?
Because it's got cockroaches in it, like you said. But don't worry, that's the stuff in my backyard, and it's been sitting there for like 6 months. So we wouldn't sell a bag with cockroaches in it, hopefully. Unless you want that. I mean, if there's considerable demand, we'll consider it. So let us know.
It's got the insect frass in there, man. It makes it supercharged.
But the point of, the point he's bringing up the insects is great, and I hope you guys can get that immediately too, is, if there wasn't insects and it had been there for that long, it would lead you to be worried, like, well, why?
Yeah, why are they avoiding
you're in the
it?
jungle here in Hawaii, I mean, they would have to be avoiding it to not be there. So early on, when I started producing biochar, I've been producing it since 2008 I started. And I started commercial production that year and was producing, a couple pickup trucks a week full of biochar, and have been consistently for years in my backyard. And so initially, I started offering a compost tea inoculation for free. I was making compost tea for a papaya project I was doing and for my backyard, and so it was really no sweat off my back to just throw some compost tea inoculation, and it sounds great too. And now for and then, at the same time, we were doing some research with fish hydrolysate, and we had this batch that was so gross you could gag a maggot. It was just disgusting. And so I had this couple gallons, and I'm like, oh my god, well, charcoal can be a deodorizer, so I'm just like, I'll just get rid of it on here. And the coolest thing happened. I never saw this coming. It actually, not only did the smell kind of go away pretty quickly, but it actually got hot.
What?
The pile of biochar got hot. It was incredible. Thermophilically hot. It got hot because of the microbial, they're doing their thing, right? And so it was really incredible, and this was like a wow. So here I took 2 gallons of fish hydrolysate, threw it on 200 gallons of biochar, mixed it in just a little bit. The smell changed from gag-a-maggot stink to a really nice earthy aroma in about 3 to 5 days.
Wow.
And the temperature rose within 2 days up to about 140, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was like, oh, the lights really went on for that one. Because I've been playing around a lot with composting and biochar already. I knew that there's a synergism there, and we really need to work on this. We got to get this. But I needed a product that was mostly biochar and easy, So here it is. I can take almost pure biochar with a lot of the benefits. So that has evolved over the years. Now the product I'm working with, it's about 2% compost, 1% fish bone meal. It's alive with microorganisms, charged with nutrients. and transformed through the microbial actions in a compost pile that I basically created in this pile of essentially pure biochar. I've been doing that for years out here in Hawaii, and I think that's part of the reason that Hawaii Biochar Products as a company was very successful and able to sell so much material, because our material worked great in so many environments. And so then I've taken that and advanced that for the mainland. We've taken that and advanced that greatly for the mainland. Still doing the same composting type process, but we've got new ingredients, and it seems to be working great. The whole idea is basically we want to mature this stuff. If there's any oils, anything like that left over, we want the microbes to just eat them up and transform them into good things like humic acids, carboxylic functional groups would be another way to say that, and plant available nutrients. Okay, we throw the nitrogen in there to help with that, you know, because there's almost always going to be some available carbon. The nitrogen will offset that. They work together, make all kinds of good stuff. So when I did the calculations for the nitrogen content of this biochar, again, we're only adding a tiny bit, but there is some amount of nitrogen fertilizer that was being added to it. I found a 540-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now this is pyrogenic carbon, not regular carbon, right? But anyways, it's a fun ratio to think of. And even with that, we were still seeing a nitrogen response where applied.
Wow, that's crazy.
At application rates. Very micro at that, but really interesting. So what we found with this matured product is that it's much more soil friendly. It's alive with beneficial microorganisms. It has some nutrients to give, and not just some micronutrients, but a small amount of macronutrients as well to give. Not just, you know, it's not going to cause any tie-up. It's actually got a little bit to give. And the surface has been complexed with all kinds of carboxylic functional groups and a lot of the enzymes and residues left over from the microbial party that just happened.
Wow, I definitely recommend using the matured biochar instead of just 100% straight biochar. So Josiah, is that the reason why sometimes people use the biochar and they just don't get the results, because it's not fully matured, and, you know, once again, not all biochars are created equal?
Yeah, a fresh, raw biochar can be great stuff. And I don't think you need to be totally scared of fresh, raw biochar. It's great, but it's a little more touchy. It's a little bit more... you know, it has to be done with a lot more attention to the details such as pH, nutrients, microbes, and some of those factors. Once it's been matured or composted or highly blended with other materials, it's got a lot more freedom. You've got a much wider window of application rate and success rate and stuff like that. So I hope it doesn't scare you guys too much about fresh raw biochar. You know, I can get fantastic results with fresh raw biochar straight out of the fire. There's no reason why you can't get fantastic results with fresh raw biochar. But you can get bad results. And there's been plenty of scientific research to show that you can get bad results using fresh raw biochar. So I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with how to use that product successfully, that you do first try something that's been blended, such as, you know, I mentioned we make, with Soil Reef, we make a 50-50 blend, which is 50% 50% biochar with compost, worm castings, and kelp meal. The product is easy to, very, very, very easy to be successful with. The matured biochar, much easier to be successful with, and it's still almost pure biochar. And then we also working on some other stuff too for later edition.
Alright, so I always want to encourage you guys to use the easiest thing possible that you're going to get the guaranteed results with. You know, I don't want to like, John, I use biochar and it sucked. Well, I don't know the quality of the biochar. I don't know what you're doing with this stuff. I know it's going to work, and that's what I just say. Just go with the easy stuff, unless you're one of those gearhead mad scientist dudes that wants to figure it out. You could probably maybe even make stuff better than this stuff. But for the majority of us, like me, a backyard gardener with no scientific degrees, I'm just gardening stuff, I'm going to take the easy way out and just, you know, get this stuff and use it in my garden. And actually, I have been using the Soil Reef 50-50 blend for actually quite some time now. Alright, Josiah, so now I want to bring up the dark side of biochar. There's some people reporting that, you know, biochar is unsustainable, it takes too much energy to produce, it actually will negatively impact plant growth, believe it or not. So Josiah, what would you say to some of the reports or people saying this kind of stuff?
Well, biochar is not idiot-proof.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't have willpower. We do. We have willpower. We can do evil with a butterfly if we wanted to. So biochar is not just good because it's biochar. It's what we do with it. And there's some people out there that think lots of bad thoughts and assume the worst. Now, I'm going to nail some of these top complaints right here.
All right, cool.
Now, first of all, there's been a lot of debate. Now, this one personally gets me. There's been a lot of debate about biochar not actually sequestering carbon, as if it decays, it's just going to melt and disappear. Well, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, really, it just sounds to me very ludicrous, and that's possibly because I have a scientific background, which includes, interest in archaeological things. Anyone who's done research on cave digs or archaeological finds, charcoal. Man, they look for charcoal.
Actually, they do the carbon dating, right, to determine how something old it is, because it's got the carbon in there still. It doesn't have nothing else. It's got the carbon, right? So,
and I don't think all carbon dating is charcoal, but yeah, that's like your prize. You find the charcoal, and lots of these things are thousands of years old. I've got personal experience here in Hawaii where I excavated an old kiln that was, it's hard to say exactly, but it's probably like 100 years old, way beyond 50. And okay, great, you found charcoal that's more than 50 years old. But the charcoal I found, it looked like it could have been produced yesterday.
Wow.
It was so clean and so sharp-edged. And there's pictures of it on the Hawaii Biochar website I posted. I just found it so beautiful and stunning. And then there's the terra preta soils. They were dead and gone, 500 years ago. Wiped out by disease and guns. 500 some plus years ago. And those soils are still black, black with charcoal. So the archaeological evidence, and so where this claim got started, I think, is basically, which to me almost seems kind of like shady science, but basically, if you take charcoal, there's some amount of labeled carbon on that charcoal. Most of that is going to be like soot and stuff. The soot is biodegradable. Right? Some of those oils and tars can be biodegradable. Not very easily, but they do biodegrade. And those are going to have, a rather sharp thing. Those are going to be biodegradable within a few years, maybe even a decade. The rest of the carbon is not going to be biodegradable, except for a much, much longer thing. It's not like it lasts forever, but it lasts a long time. We're talking hundreds to thousands of years, maybe even tens of thousands of years. Maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. So if you were just to measure for, let's say, 6 months, or maybe even if you're really, really patient, you can wait 2 years, you're going to see the decay rate over 2 years, and you're going to see carbon disappearing over the first 2 years. And most of that carbon is going to be because of the soot stuff that's left over, which is going to give you a curve like this, and then you apply it to the rest of the thing, and you say, oh, see, after 20 years, it's all gone. Well, that's only accounting for one very small fraction of it. And that's the basic standard theory for where people might be coming up with these numbers. Another one is that some people are producing really funky black stuff and calling it biochar, and then testing it and seeing, see, we made this stuff, we called it biochar, we tested it, and it did. The only real way to test is put the biochar in the ground, start the stopwatch, and wait. And from all evidence that I've seen with any sort of pragmatic approach, archaeological, the terra preta, I think it's a rather childish debate, personally, and I have my curiosities as to intent. So then let's talk about negative effects in soil. Oftentimes it's been brought up that biochar can cause negative effects in soil. Yes, it can. Biochar is not idiot-proof. I, too, when I first started playing with biochar, was able to get negative plant growth response. I was so excited about biochar, I laid it down so thick in my garden. It was horrible. I got a horrible crop, man. because I brought the pH up in my garden. The soil, I brought my soil pH up to 8.2 in my garden. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Whoops. So that caused negative plant growth response. There's been other cases where you can get negative plant growth response. I've done analysis where you can actually find a growth curve where, you know, at 5%, 10%, 15%, 20% by volume, biochar in the soil media, improved growth. 50%, 70% biochar by volume, negative growth. Okay, so it's not like, okay, I used 5% biochar and got positive growth. Well, I should use 50% biochar and I'll get 10 times the growth. Sorry, I wish it worked like that, but it doesn't. So we found that, you know, there is a sweet spot, there is a magic thing there, you know, not, you know, it's so, and then some of the other topics about, you know, on the terms of biochar equals bad would be unsustainable. So biochar being touted as unsustainable. Sure, you could produce biochar unsustainably. But why? Why would you? It's so much easier to do it sustainably, actually, because now let me explain why I would say that. So unsustainably, in my mind, would be cutting down an old growth forest to produce biochar. Wow, that's just stupid.
That's wrong.
I mean, first of all, old growth forest would probably be more valuable as timber if you were to do that. Secondly, it's probably, you know, not probably, it's vastly more valuable being left as an old growth forest. And third, there's so much biomass sitting around being wasted on a regular basis for free. Some people even pay you to take their biomass. Why not use that? There's so much of that on this planet right now. There's so much of that on this planet right now. It's incredible. It's just absolutely incredible. I partly got into biochar because the house, you know, some of the wood you might be seeing in the background, was milled by me. I worked with a local sawmill to get the wood for this house. And I can tell you, sawmills produce lots. They take a round log and make square lumber. There's a lot left over. Just with that one industry alone, we'd have plenty enough biochar for any near-term needs.
All right, so you guys just learned that biochar is probably a good thing. I definitely believe in it and believe you guys should use it. So the question comes up, how do you use it? So Josiah, how do you use biochar in your garden to grow more vegetables and more fruits and more edibles around your yard?
5 to 10% is probably the important thing, most important thing to remember. 5 to 10% by volume. In all my years of playing with it in my backyard and working with clients, I was just talking with John about this earlier. You know, through my backyard here in Hawaii, I produced about 600 pickup trucks full of biochar. And most of that was sold directly to farmers here on the Big Island. And so I've heard a lot of feedback from my clientele about their response, their experience with it. And that's been a really productive thing, and we as a community, we've learned together. And so when I say 5 to 10% by volume, I didn't just pull that out of thin air. That has over time become a very safe and substantial number that we've settled on. I'll embellish on that just a little bit. We've also found that as little as 2% by volume can still be very significant. As much as 20% can still be very safe. Now this is where you start getting these outer ends, where you got to use your head. And don't, I suggest if you're going to go there, try first with a few pots or a small part and then extend. For instance, I work with a tomato farmer that was using it at 30% with his greenhouse tomatoes, fantastically. He did 30% in the bottom half of his pot to maximize the use of the biochar. Fantastic results, actually almost ridiculous. 5 to 10% by volume.
So Josiah, let's give an actual real world example. Okay, so if somebody has a 4 foot by 4 foot square foot raised bed garden, which many of you guys may have, how much biochar would you actually add to it?
Oh, it's late in the evening for math. But let's see. 5% is 1/4 inch, 5 inches deep. 10% is 1/2 inch, 5 inches deep. Most people's hose or pick or often tillage is in something in that 5 inches deep range. So that's why I've normalized those numbers there. So 1/4 inch coverage to a 1/2 inch coverage, tilled in about 5 inches deep. So then you take that and you figure out your square footage. So if we have 12 square feet at 1 inch of depth, that would be 1 cubic foot. If we're only going for if we're only going for 1/4 inch, we could cover 4 times 12, 48 square feet. So for that 16 square foot garden, you'd only need 1/4 of a cubic foot, which is typical garden bag, which is going to be about 1.5 to 2 gallons. Rough math. Don't quote me on this.
So it's usually sold by the cubic foot in the bag, right? So if you just have like a half bag added to your 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed, you're probably good, right?
Yeah, but we were just talking about this earlier, coming out with smaller bags to help you guys be successful easier. So little 2-gallon bags might work then.
So now you guys know how much to add, like 5 to 10%, but how do you add it? I already got my plants planted. Can I like side dress it in? Can I just lay it on top of the soil? Do I need to mix it up before you plant for the season? That's how actually I add it, before I plant for the season. So what would you say on that, Josiah?
Lots of different ways. You can add it. Typically, one thing you want to think about is that you want the biochar to be well blended with your soil. It's not a fertilizer that's just going to melt and distribute itself. You want to physically blend it with your soil. That will happen over time through bugs and through just general, but you want to blend it with your soil. This is often best done if you're in a temperate climate that has a winter season of significant amount. You'll want to actually blend it in the fall. So in the fall, after you've harvested and everything, and before the big winter comes, you want to blend it into your soil and then let everything settle, and then come springtime, plant and you're ready to go. If you've got a large area and you want to maximize the efficiency of a small amount of biochar, you really only need to put it right down the row. You don't need to put the biochar on the aisles this year. You can get that another time. So just apply the biochar right down the row. Another way to go is if you only have a really small amount of biochar and you have a lot of acreage to do, use it just with the plantings. So you can use it in the potting media that you do your little seedlings in, or you can use it to have your special little mix there so that when you put your plants in, you have your special mix to tuck them into bed with.
Definitely good answers. So another question I got is, I know I got a lot of hydroponic and aquaponic growers, so how can biochar be used in aquaponics and hydroponics?
Absolutely. Yes, it can and has been. It can have qualities very much like perlite. An interesting thing is it has, it physically kind of looks like a black perlite or something almost. It kind of feels like a black perlite almost. But it has the cation exchange capacity more like a vermiculite.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
so it helps hold on to
man.
nutrients. I know, right? So that's the pitch and a half right there, right? So it's got the physical feel of a perlite with the cation exchange capacity of a vermiculite, and it won't go muddy on you like the vermiculite does after a while. So it can be very interesting to use with the hydroponic and aquaponic media. In aquaponics, it can be used in the biofilter. That's the ebb and flow biofilter, or however your flushing system works. It can also be used in the actual little trays that your plants are grown in. I've got one client that actually uses that, and they put that back into the vermicastings and then reuse it again and again and again, because the biochar doesn't really decay. You just keep on using it again and again.
Wow. So let's talk about another way that you can use biochar and incorporate it into your garden. That's one of the ways I'm going to start doing after this trip, because I've asked them a lot about this, is actually adding it and pre-inoculating it in your compost to not only increase the nutrient in your compost, but also to get it in there so when you got the finished compost, your biochar is already in there. So Josiah, how will adding the biochar help your compost pile work more effectively?
It's one of my favorite things. I'm so glad we got to this, and I hope you've managed to keep your interest this far. Working biochar with compost is a very synergistic thing. It can benefit the compost and it can benefit the biochar as well. What they've found, or what we've all found when including biochar with compost, is that we can find reduced nutrient loss.
Wow.
Oftentimes the nitrogen volatilizes off. You can smell it volatilizing off as ammonia.
I do.
Okay? Incorporating the biochar can and has been shown to help reduce the loss of nitrogen through volatilization. What we've also found is that it can increase the microbial activity. It can increase the microbial activity, which often results in a reduced amount of time till the compost is mature. That's a big deal sometimes. So those two factors alone are really interesting, as well as the aeration factor. Sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, the biochar is much like perlite. It's real fluffy, has lots of air pockets in it, so it can help create environments that are more conducive to your beneficial microorganisms than your not so beneficial microorganisms. And as we've kind of gotten here, the biochar does not necessarily decay. So it's really interesting, the difference between your end product when you've used biochar and your end product when you haven't. I don't know how to explain that in much easier ways than good. Sure, I gotta try it. So one really interesting thing that is, not only can it improve your compost, but in that same thing, you're actually improving the biochar as well. You can be dramatically improving the biochar. Anything that might have been bad about the biochar at the beginning, such as a high pH, if that's not desirable at that time, the soot and oils and resins that may be there because of however it might have been produced, all of that is going to be transformed in the compost pile. And the biochar, after having gone through the compost pile, will be proliferated with microorganisms, charged with nutrients, and covered in all kinds of the wonderful things that makes compost so great, such as the carboxylic functional groups, humic acids and fulvic acids, and enzymes, and all these wonderful things in compost piles. So, you put the two together, good things happen.
Wow, so the last question I have for you, Josiah, is what's the top 3 reasons why my viewers should start using some biochar in their garden?
Water, nutrients, and a healthy soil environment.
Wow. Yep, the biochar will retain the water. It'll allow for more soil nutrition, and it's going to encourage the beneficial microbes and fungi, and that's what I'm all about. That's what I teach you guys, a natural method of gardening and just trying to model nature, and I believe wholeheartedly that biochar can definitely help you do that. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode here. It's gone a little bit over time, but I'm glad because there's a lot of good information, and I hope you truly got to the end. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and hopefully I'll be able to work with the Soil Reef Company to get a good deal for you guys on the biochar so you guys can get it directly mailed to you, because I know it can be quite hard to find locally. So once again, my name is John Kohler with GrowingYourGreens.com. We'll see you next time. Keep on growing with biochar!
Aloha! Shoo!
Alright, this is John Kohler with GrowingYourGreens.com. Aloha, coming at you from Hawaii again. I have another cool, exciting episode for you, one that I've been waiting a while, and I'm glad I did, to make